The fluorescent lights of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado buzzed overhead, casting their sterile glow across the mess hall, where 53 military personnel ate their lunch in the controlled chaos that defined military dining facilities worldwide. Elena Hartwell stood just inside the entrance, letting her eyes adjust, letting her senses take in the room the way 3 combat tours had taught her. Every exit marked, every cluster of personnel assessed, every potential threat cataloged and filed away in the part of her brain that never truly rested. She was 34 years old, the same age her father had been when he died. The coincidence had occurred to her that morning as she dressed in her service khakis, adjusting the collar in the mirror, with movements that had become ritual. The same age, the same base, the same weight of responsibility settling across her shoulders like a physical thing. Her reflection had shown her the cost of those 3 combat tours, a thin scar above her left eyebrow from shrapnel in Kandahar. Sun-weathered skin that no amount of California coastal living would ever soften. Eyes that had seen too much but refused to look away. Her hair, the same deep red her father had passed down, was pulled back in the regulation ponytail she had worn since the day she graduated from Bud's training. The trident pinned above her ribbon rack caught the light. Hers, earned through 6 months of deliberate suffering that had broken men twice her size. But it was the second trident that mattered most today. The tarnished one wrapped in cloth and tucked into her breast pocket, pressing against her heart with every breath. Her father's trident, the one he had been wearing when a training device malfunctioned tore him apart at this very base 31 years ago. She had been 3 years old enough to remember fragments, his laugh echoing through their small house, the way he threw her in the air and caught her with hands that never shook, the smell of gun oil and Old Spice that meant safety. Old enough to remember the day men in dress uniforms came to their door, and her mother's screams shattered something that would never fully heal. Elena stepped fully into the mess hall. No one looked up. No one noticed. That was the beauty of anonymity in a place like this. Just another officer in service khakis, unremarkable, unless someone looked closely enough to see the trident that still turned heads in certain circles. Most did not look. The food line moved with institutional efficiency. Salisbury steak that had never seen an actual steak. Potatoes achieving the perfect balance between overcooked and underseasoned. Vegetables that had long ago surrendered any pretense of freshness. Elena filled her tray with the practiced movements of someone who had learned to eat whatever kept her functional. Taste was a luxury. Nutrition was a necessity. Everything else was noise. The dining room sprawled before her, tables arranged in loose clusters that reflected the invisible tribal boundaries of military life. SEALs with SEALs, Marines with Marines. Support staff in their own corner, the eternal outsiders looking in. She identified her people immediately. SEAL Team 7 occupied 2 tables near the windows, 6 operators eating with the particular silence of men who communicated more through presence than words. She studied them without staring. Lieutenant Nolan Prescott, 28 explosives expert with hands steady enough to thread a needle in a hurricane. Weston Kearney, 25 communications specialist from rural Wisconsin, whose technical scores had set records. And sitting apart from the younger operators, his back to the wall in the way of men who had learned that lesson through blood, was Chief Garrett Hensley, 52 years old, 34 years of service, the most experienced enlisted man in the entire naval special warfare community. Elena knew his file by heart. She knew something else too, something that made her chest tight whenever she looked at him. Garrett Hensley had been 18 years old in Kuwait, a green private on his first deployment, scared out of his mind when an IED detonated 50 meters from his patrol. He had frozen, could not move, could not breathe, could not do anything but stand there while death reached for him with invisible fingers. Lieutenant Marcus Hartwell had saved his life, pulled him out of a minefield under fire, carried him 200 meters while bullets snapped past their heads and the desert tried to bury them both. Garrett Hensley owed his entire life to Elena's father. He did not know yet that Elena was about to become his commanding officer. A table near the center of the room drew her attention next. 8 Marines, their body language radiating the particular confidence of men who had seen combat and returned with stories. They sat like they owned the space, Physical presence counting for something in this world, and these men had presence in abundance. The one doing most of the talking had the bearing of a senior NCO, late 20s, built like someone who treated the gym as a second religion, Texas accent carrying across the room like a challenge. Derek Callahan, Gunnery Sergeant Force Reconnaissance, third-generation Marine with an impeccable service record, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Father was a retired colonel who had made his opinions about women in combat roles abundantly clear in several editorial pieces that had circulated through military circles. Elena had seen his file that morning, had noted the informal observations about concerns regarding unit cohesion whenever female leadership was discussed. She navigated between tables, tray balance, finding a path that would take her close enough to hear without being obvious about it. The mess hall was crowded enough that proximity meant nothing. Just another body trying to find somewhere to sit. She was 3 feet from their table when Callahan's voice rose above the ambient noise. "I'm telling you the intel's solid. 48-hour window, then we're wheels up." Elena's steps slowed. Her morning briefing had covered the same timeline. Joint operation, SEAL Team 7 as primary assault element, Marine Force Recon providing perimeter security and quick reaction force, 4 American hostages held in a mountain compound, 72 hours until execution. She moved closer. "What's the hostage situation?" one of the younger Marines asked. 4 Americans, aid workers." Callahan's tone suggested exactly what he thought of civilians who wandered into war zones with good intentions and no tactical sense. "Been held 3 weeks. Intel says we've got 72 hours before the situation goes terminal." Elena's jaw tightened. She knew more about those hostages than Callahan did. More than anyone in this room except perhaps Hensley, who had received the same classified briefing she had. One of the hostages was a 58-year-old woman named Dr. Catherine Shaw, former Army combat medic, Desert Storm veteran, current humanitarian worker providing medical services in regions where Western medicine was scarce and trust was even scarcer. Elena knew her face from photographs that had arrived at her childhood home every year for 31 years. Knew her handwriting from letters that her mother had saved in a box under her bed. Knew her voice from a single phone call when Elena was 12 years old and had just announced her intention to follow her father into naval special warfare. Dr. Catherine Shaw had been standing next to Marcus Hartwell when he disarmed the IED that would have killed 23 soldiers. She had written to his widow every year since his death, every single year, telling her about the lives she had saved with the skills Marcus had helped her learn. Telling her that his sacrifice had not been for nothing. This mission was not just another hostage rescue. This was personal in ways that made Elena's hands want to shake and her heart want to break. She squeezed past Callahan's table, the crowd forcing her into close proximity. She felt the tug on her ponytail before she registered the motion. A sharp backward jerk that snapped her head and sent hot anger flooding through her chest. She turned slowly, face carefully neutral, despite the rage screaming beneath her skin. Callahan had released her hair. He was grinning at his companions, the casual cruelty of men who had never faced consequences for such actions, written in every line of his posture. "Whoa there, sweetheart." His Texas drawl made the endearment sound like an insult. "Admin offices are that way." He gestured vaguely toward the east side of the base. "This section's for operators." His table erupted in laughter. One of the younger Marines, barely old enough to have finished his first tour, added his contribution. "Yeah, let the operators eat in peace. You're blocking the view." Elena felt the weight in her breast pocket, the tarnished metal that had touched her father's chest, the legacy she carried everywhere she went. She opened her mouth to respond, to educate this particular specimen on exactly who she was and what she had done. But Callahan waved her off before she could speak. "Seriously, fuck off." He had already turned back to his companions, dismissing her existence entirely. "We're discussing actual combat operations here. Grown-up stuff." More laughter, more casual cruelty from men who would never understand what it cost to stand in this room wearing this uniform. Elena raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Years of similar encounters had taught her the value of choosing battles carefully. In 4 hours, these men would understand exactly how badly they had miscalculated. In 4 hours, she would stand at the front of a briefing room and watch Callahan's face drain of color when he realized who she was. For now, patience. She found a corner table with a clear line of sight to Callahan's group in a position that kept her back to the wall. Old habits from too many firefights where situational awareness meant the difference between going home and going home in a box. Her food was institutional and forgettable. But Elena ate with mechanical efficiency, her mind already processing what she had just overheard. 72 hours until execution. Dr. Catherine Shaw counting down the hours until either rescue or death. 31 years of letters about to end in either salvation or tragedy. And somewhere in this base, 8 Marines who had no idea that the woman they had just dismissed and humiliated was about to lead them into combat. Elena finished her meal in silence. When she stood to leave, she allowed herself one final glance at Callahan's table. 4 hours. That was all the time he had left to believe the world worked the way he thought it did. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The briefing room could hold 50 personnel comfortably. This afternoon it held 23, and the tension made it feel like twice that number. Elena arrived early, entering through a side door that let her assess the room before anyone noticed her presence. The seating arrangement told her everything she needed to know about tribal allegiances and existing power structures. SEAL Team 7 occupied the front rows. 6 men sitting with the loose confidence of operators who had worked together long enough to develop their own unspoken communication patterns. They talked quietly among themselves, voices low enough that Elena could not make out specific words, but loud enough to convey that they were not particularly concerned about whoever was about to take command. Garrett Hensley sat apart from the younger operators. His eyes were already on the door when Elena entered, and something flickered across his face when he saw her. Recognition. Not of her face, but of something else. Something in the way she moved, or the set of her shoulders, or the particular stillness that came from knowing you were about to walk into a room full of people who would judge you before you spoke a single word. The Marines sat behind the SEALs, Callahan's Force Recon Unit, maintaining the separation between services that would need to be bridged before they deployed together. Callahan himself sat in the center of his group, still eating another protein bar, while holding court with the same casual authority he had displayed in the mess hall. He had not seen her yet. None of them had. Elena moved to the front of the room, setting her briefing materials on the podium, with enough noise to draw attention without seeming to demand it. Conversations died in waves as operators looked up and registered her presence. She watched Callahan's face, watched the exact moment recognition hit him like a claymore mine at close range. The protein bar stopped halfway to his mouth. His complexion went from sun-weathered tan to ash gray in the span of 2 heartbeats. The wrapper slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor, forgotten. Elena let the silence stretch. Let them all understand that something significant was happening, even if most of them did not yet know what. Then she spoke, her voice carrying the particular authority of someone who had earned the right to command through blood and competence rather than rank alone. Good afternoon. I'm Commander Elena Hartwell, SEAL Team 7. I will be your commanding officer for this operation and all subsequent operations until such time as Naval Special Warfare Command decides otherwise. She let that sink in. Watch the micro-expressions. Prescott's eyes narrowing in assessment. Kearney looking between her and the SEAL Team veterans, trying to gauge the appropriate response. Hensley's face showed nothing, but his eyes had changed. Something ancient and knowing moving behind them. Something that looked almost like hope. Callahan looked like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him whole. We deploy at 0400 tomorrow. Wheels up from North Island. Target insertion at 0300 local time. Elena activated the projector, throwing satellite imagery onto the screen behind her. 4 hostages, all American civilians working with a non-governmental organization providing medical services in the regional province. They were taken 3 weeks ago by an insurgent group with ties to larger terrorist networks we have been tracking for the past 18 months. She zoomed in on the compound, highlighting key defensive positions. Intelligence suggests a 72-hour execution timeline. We are currently at hour 65. 7 hours remain before the situation becomes terminal. She paused, letting the weight of those numbers settle over the room. This will be a joint operation. SEAL Team 7 provides primary assault element. Marine Force Reconnaissance provides perimeter security and quick reaction force. Her eyes found Callahan. Questions so far? Silence. They were still processing. still trying to reconcile the woman Callahan had dismissed in the mess hall, with the commander now briefing them on a hostage rescue operation. Elena continued walking them through the tactical plan with the kind of detail that demonstrated she had done this before. Insertion routes, helicopter landing zones, enemy force estimates, rules of engagement, extraction contingencies. Every aspect of the operation laid out with professional precision. When she reached the discussion of approach angles to the primary structure, Prescott raised his hand. Elena nodded at him. Ma'am, the plan road exposes us for approximately 45 seconds while we cross from the low ground to the compound wall. That's a significant vulnerability window if the enemy has any competent defensive positions. Good question. Tactical thinking without attitude. Elena appreciated that. Excellent observation, Lieutenant. Let me walk you through the ballistics. She pulled up a terrain analysis overlay. Primary enemy firing positions are here, here, and here, approximately 1,200 meters from our approach vector. Standard engagement ranges for the AK pattern rifles we expect them to be carrying. She pulled up her notes, the calculations she had run that morning. At 1,200 meters, a 7.62 by 51 millimeter round from a Dragunov, which is our worst-case scenario for trained marksmen, has a flight time of approximately 1.8 seconds. Current weather forecast shows winds from the northwest at 8 to 12 knots, which translates to a drift of roughly 4.2 inches at that range. She looked directly at Prescott. By the time any competent enemy shooter acquires a target, compensates for wind and range, and takes a shot, we will have reached the defilade position behind this terrain feature. Their effective window for engagement is less than 10 seconds. Against a moving target at that range in limited visibility conditions, their probability of hit drops below 15%. Acceptable risk given the timeline constraints we're operating under. The room had gone completely silent. Elena had just demonstrated graduate-level understanding of ballistics terrain analysis and tactical probability assessment, the kind of knowledge that came from years of study combined with practical application under fire. Prescott nodded slowly. Understood, ma'am. Thank you for the breakdown. Any other questions about the tactical approach? No hands. Elena moved to individual assignments matching operators to positions based on their personnel files and the capabilities their previous commanders had documented. Callahan had not said a word, had not raised his hand, had not made eye contact. He sat perfectly still, looking like a man watching his entire worldview collapse in real time. Good. Let him process. Gunnery Sergeant Callahan, your force recon unit will establish overwatch positions here, here, and here. She indicated points on the satellite imagery. You will provide suppressive fire during our approach and cover our extraction. You will also serve as the quick reaction force if the situation develops in ways we haven't anticipated. Clear. Callahan's voice came out rough, like he was forcing words through a throat that wanted to stay closed. Crystal clear, ma'am. Good. Elena locked eyes with him. Let him see that she remembered the mess hall. Remembered the hair pulling and the dismissal and the casual cruelty. Let him understand that she was professional enough not to let it affect the mission, but not so professional that she had forgotten. One more thing before we break for individual team briefs. Elena pulled up the hostage photographs. 4 faces filled the screen. 3 were young, late 20s or early 30s. Aid workers who had believed they could make a difference in a part of the world that ate idealists for breakfast. They were faces full of hope and naivety, the kind of people who inspired both admiration and frustration in equal measure. The 4th face was older, gray hair framing features marked by decades of hard service, eyes that had witnessed too much suffering to ever be surprised by it again. Dr. Catherine Shaw. Elena felt the familiar weight against her chest, the tarnished metal her father had worn, the legacy she carried into every room she entered. Dr. Catherine Shaw, 58 years old, former Army combat medic with service in Desert Storm. She has been operating in the region for 5 years, providing medical training to local healthcare workers. Elena kept her voice level, professional, betraying nothing of the personal connection that made this mission different from every other hostage rescue she had participated in. Intelligence suggests she was the primary target. The others were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dr. Shaw has combat experience and medical training. If we're lucky, she's been keeping the other hostages stable and managing their physical and psychological condition. If we're not lucky, her background makes her a high-value target for propaganda purposes. Either way, she's our priority extraction. Movement in her peripheral vision. Hensley had straightened in his seat. His eyes were fixed on the photograph of Dr. Shaw with an intensity that spoke of recognition, of memory, of debt. Elena met his gaze for just a moment, saw the question forming in his eyes, saw him connect the dots. Hartwell, Commander Hartwell, the daughter of the man who had saved both their lives 34 years ago. She gave him the smallest nod. Hensley's face did something complicated, grief and pride and determination, all flickering across his features, before settling into something that looked like resolve. We have 16 hours until departure. Elena continued. Use them wisely. Check your equipment. Review your assignments. Get your minds right. This is a straightforward operation with a tight timeline and limited intelligence. We go in fast. We extract our people. We get out. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. She paused. Everyone comes home. The words hung in the air like a promise. Questions? Silence. Dismissed. Team leaders remain behind for individual mission packages. The room emptied quickly. Operators heading for their equipment lockers and pre-mission routines. Callahan was among the first out the door, moving with the urgency of someone who desperately needed to be anywhere else. Prescott, Kearney, and Hensley approached the podium. Elena handed each of them classified folders containing their specific mission elements and tactical packages. Lieutenant Prescott, a word about the breach charges. Ma'am, the compound walls are Soviet-era construction, likely reinforced concrete with aggregate that includes limestone from local quarries. Standard composition for that era and region. Your C4 calculations need to account for approximately 20% additional density compared to standard modern concrete. Undershoot the charge and we're stuck outside. Overshoot and we risk structural collapse that could trap or kill the hostages. Prescott opened his folder and checked the specifications she had included. His eyes widened slightly. This is very specific intelligence, Commander. May I ask where you got the construction details? Elena allowed herself the smallest smile. My grandfather spent time in occupied Germany after World War II, documenting Soviet construction methodologies for the OSS. The intelligence community has mostly forgotten that era's institutional knowledge, but I've made it a point to study the family archives. Soviet field engineers use standardized designs across multiple theaters. If this compound matches the pattern and the imagery suggests it does, then these specifications should be accurate. Prescott nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression. Understood, ma'am. I'll adjust the calculations accordingly. Good. Petty Officer Kearney, the communications package includes frequencies and encryption keys for all elements. I want redundant systems checked twice. We cannot afford to lose contact during the critical phases of this operation. Understood, Commander. I'll personally verify every system before we load. Elena dismissed them and turned to Hensley. The old chief had waited patiently, his folder unopened in his hands. Up close, Elena could see the years written on his face, the scars of 3 decades of service, the eyes that had seen too many young men die and too many missions go wrong, the eyes of a man who owed his entire life to her father. Chief Hensley, Commander. They stood in silence for a long moment. The empty briefing room felt smaller somehow, more intimate, the weight of history pressing down on them both. You served with my father, Elena said finally. Not a question. Hensley nodded. Kuwait, 91. I was 18 years old. Green as grass. Scared out of my mind. He paused. An IED detonated 50 meters from our patrol. I froze. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Just stood there waiting to die. His voice roughened. Your father pulled me out of that minefield, carried me 200 meters under fire, took a bullet in the shoulder doing it, never complained, never hesitated, just picked me up and ran. Elena felt her throat tighten. She had known this story, had read about it in her father's service records, but hearing it from the man whose life had been saved was different, more real, more painful. He saved Catherine Shaw that same day, Elena said quietly. disarmed an IED that would have killed 23 soldiers. She was one of them. Hensley's eyes widened. Dr. Shaw, the hostage. She was there. She was the patrol medic. My father taught her emergency field surgery while they waited for extraction. Taught her things that weren't in any manual, things he'd learned through experience. Elena's hand moved unconsciously toward her pocket. She's been writing to my mother every year since he died. Every single year. Telling her about the lives she saved. Telling her that his sacrifice meant something. Hensley was quiet for a long moment, processing. 34 years, he finally said. I've spent 34 years trying to live up to what your father did for me. Trying to be worthy of the life he gave me. He met Elena's eyes. Now his daughter is my commanding officer, and we're going to rescue the woman he died training replacements for. Elena nodded. Some circles close in ways you never expect. Hensley reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. He handed it to Elena. The image showed two men in desert camouflage. One was young, 18 years old with fear still visible in his eyes but a smile breaking through despite everything. The other was older, early 30s, red hair, steady hands, eyes that looked exactly like the ones Elena saw in the mirror every morning. Her father, alive, smiling, standing next to the young soldier whose life he had just saved. I've carried that photograph for 34 years, Hensley said, looked at it every day, reminded myself what real courage looks like. He paused. Your father would be damn proud of what you've become, Commander. Elena's hands shook slightly as she held the photograph. She had seen pictures of her father before, the official Navy photographs, the family albums her mother kept. But this was different. This was her father in his element, in the moment, alive and vital and everything she had always imagined him to be. Thank you, Chief. Her voice came out rough. This means more than I can say. Keep it. Hensley's voice was firm. It belongs with you now, with his legacy. Elena carefully tucked the photograph into her breast pocket next to her father's tarnished trident, two pieces of his history pressing against her heart. Chief, I need you to understand something. She met his eyes. This mission isn't just about the hostages. It's not even just about Dr. Shaw. It's about proving that everything my father sacrificed meant something. That the legacy he left behind, the lives he saved, the people he trained, that it all mattered. Hensley nodded slowly. I understand, Commander. More than you know. I need you to be my bridge to the team. The men don't know me yet. They don't trust me yet. But they trust you. 34 years of service. You've earned something I can't earn in a single briefing. You've got it, ma'am. Hensley straightened. Whatever you need. Your father gave me a second chance at life. This is my chance to repay that debt. Elena extended her hand. Hensley shook it. His grip was firm, steady. The grip of a man who had spent 34 years preparing for a moment he had never known was coming. Get some rest, Chief. We've got 16 hours until everything starts moving. I want you sharp. Yes, ma'am. Hensley turned to leave, then paused at the door. Commander, for what it's worth, I knew the moment you walked into that briefing room. Before you said a word, I knew exactly who you were. Elena raised an eyebrow. How? Hensley smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. Your eyes, ma'am. You've got your father's eyes, the eyes of someone who brings people home. Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone in the empty briefing room, with the weight of legacy pressing down on her shoulders. The hallway outside the briefing room was empty when Elena emerged, but she had taken only a few steps before she heard footsteps behind her. Quick footsteps, purposeful. She turned. Derek Callahan stood 10 feet away. His face was pale, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides like he was fighting the urge to either run or swing. Commander Hartwell. His voice cracked slightly on her name. Permission to speak freely. Elena studied him for a long moment. The man who had pulled her hair, called her sweetheart, told her to fuck off, dismissed her as nothing but an administrative annoyance. Granted, Callahan swallowed hard. Ma'am, about what happened in the mess hall. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know. You didn't know what Sergeant. Elena's voice was ice. You didn't know that the woman you were dismissing might actually be qualified. You didn't know that your assumptions about who belongs in combat might be wrong. You didn't know that pulling someone's hair and telling them to fuck off might have consequences. Callahan flinched. Ma'am, Let me be clear about something, Sergeant. Elena stepped closer, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead, close enough to smell the protein bar still on his breath. What you did in that mess hall wasn't just disrespectful. It wasn't just unprofessional. It was a window into exactly how you think about women in uniform, about women in combat, about women who have earned the right to lead through the same blood and suffering you have. Callahan said nothing. There was nothing he could say. I have 3 combat tours, Sergeant. I have a trident I earned through 6 months of bullets training that broke men twice my size. I have disarmed IEDs in Kandahar. I have killed enemy combatants at ranges you can't imagine. I have held dying soldiers in my arms and told them they were going to be okay when we both knew they weren't. Elena let the words sink in. And none of that mattered to you, because I was a woman with a ponytail in a mess hall, and that was all you needed to know. Callahan's face had gone from pale to red, shame burning in his cheeks. You want to apologize, Elena continued. Fine. Apology noted. But here's what I need you to understand. In 16 hours, we deploy together. Your force recon unit will be providing security for my SEAL team. Lives will depend on every person in that formation doing their job with absolute precision. I do not have time for your guilt. I do not have time for your attempts at redemption. I have time only for operators who can put personal feelings aside and execute the mission. She held his gaze. Can you do that, Sergeant? Can you follow orders from a woman you dismissed as nothing? Can you trust a commander you assume was incompetent based on nothing but gender? Callahan was silent for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. The shame was still there, but beneath it was something else. Something that looked almost like the first crack in a foundation he had built his entire life upon. Yes, ma'am. His voice was steady now, certain. I can do that. Good. Then we have nothing more to discuss. Get your team ready, review the mission packages, and Sergeant, ma'am, if anyone else in your unit shares your previous assumptions about female leadership, I suggest you correct them before we deploy. I don't want any surprises in the field. Understood, ma'am. Elena turned and walked away, leaving Callahan standing in the empty hallway with the wreckage of his assumptions scattered around him. She did not look back. That evening, Derek Callahan sat in his quarters and stared at his phone for a long time before dialing. The voice that answered was deep, commanding. The voice of a man who had spent 40 years giving orders and expecting them to be obeyed. Derek, wasn't expecting to hear from you before deployment. Hey, Dad. Callahan's voice was flat, tired. Got something I need to tell you. What's wrong? Mission compromised? No, mission's fine. Callahan paused. We got a new commander today, SEAL Team 7. And it's a woman. Silence on the other end, then a snort of derision. A woman commanding SEALs. This is what's wrong with the military today. Diversity hires and political correctness. She'll crack under pressure. They always do. Callahan said nothing. You there, son? Yeah, Dad, I'm here. Callahan swallowed. There's something else. Something I did today, in the mess hall, before I knew who she was. He told his father about the hair pulling, the dismissal, the way he had told her to fuck off while his Marines laughed. His father's response was immediate. So what you didn't know? Besides, she probably needed to be put in her place. Women in combat units forget where they belong sometimes. Callahan felt something twist in his gut. Dad, she shot perfect scores on all 3 weapons this morning. 40 out of 40 on everything. And her mission brief was the most detailed tactical breakdown I've ever seen. She calculated bullet drift at 1,200 meters in her head. Silence again. Longer this time. So she's competent, his father finally said. Doesn't change anything. Women don't belong in combat leadership. It's biology. It's nature. They're too emotional, too weak. The standards get lowered to accommodate them. The standards weren't lowered for her dad. She went through the same BUDS training every SEAL goes through. Same standards. Same suffering. She made it when men twice her size rang the bell. Then she got lucky, or someone helped her along. You know how these things work, Derek. The brass wants diversity numbers. They make exceptions. Callahan thought about Elena Hartwell standing in front of that briefing room, the scar above her eyebrow from shrapnel in Kandahar. the weight in her eyes from 3 combat tours, the way she had looked at him in the hallway like she could see straight through to his soul and found him wanting. I don't think anyone made exceptions for her dad. You're letting a pretty face cloud your judgment. Focus on the mission. Do your job. Let the woman prove she can't handle pressure. It's only a matter of time. Dad, I've got to go, son. Meeting with some of the Veterans Association boys. You watch your back over there. Don't let her get you killed. The line went dead. Callahan sat in the darkness of his quarters for a long time after that, his father's words echoing in his head like they always did. The certainty, the conviction, the absolute belief that he was right about everything. But tonight, for the first time in his life, Derek Callahan wasn't sure his father was right at all. He thought about Elena Hartwell's eyes, the way they had pinned him in that hallway like a specimen under glass, the way she had listed her qualifications without bragging, without defensiveness, just simple facts that destroyed every assumption he had ever made. He thought about Chief Hensley, the old man who had earned respect from every operator on the base through 3 decades of service, the way Hensley had looked at Commander Hartwell like she had already proven something before she said a single word. He thought about what his father would say if he knew that Derek was lying awake questioning everything he had been taught to believe. Sleep was a long time coming that night. Elena stood in her quarters staring at the photograph Hensley had given her. Her father smiled back at her from 34 years ago. Young, vital, alive with the certainty of purpose that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you were meant to do. She had his eyes. Everyone always said so. But looking at this photograph, she realized it was more than that. She had his stance, his bearing, the particular way he held himself that said he was ready for anything and afraid of nothing. She had spent her entire life trying to be worthy of his memory, trying to fill shoes that had always felt too big, trying to honor a legacy that had been cut short 31 years ago on this very base. Tomorrow she would lead men into combat, men who did not trust her yet, men who had spent their careers in units that had only recently been forced to acknowledge that women could serve in combat roles. Some of them would never accept her. She knew that. Some minds were too calcified by years of assumption and prejudice to ever change, but some of them might. Some of them might see past the ponytail and the chromosomes and the assumptions. Some of them might recognize competence when it was demonstrated, might learn to trust a commander who proved herself through action rather than argument. She placed the photograph on her desk, propping it against her lamp where she could see it. Then she began preparing her gear for deployment. 16 hours until wheels up, 16 hours until everything started moving, 16 hours until she proved to SEAL Team 7 in Callahan's Marines that Commander Elena Hartwell had earned every bit of authority her rank implied. Somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, Dr. Catherine Shaw was counting down the hours until either rescue or execution. She had no idea that the daughter of the man who saved her life 34 years ago was coming to return the favor. Some debts demanded to be repaid, and some circles, no matter how long they took, always found their way to closing. The weapons range at Coronado existed in a perpetual state of controlled violence. Downrange paper targets absorbed thousands of rounds daily, their centers obliterated by operators who treated marksmanship as both religion and science. The smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air, mixing with salt spray from the Pacific Ocean just beyond the berms. Elena arrived at 0600 2 hours before the rest of Team 7 was scheduled for final weapons qualification. The sun had not yet crested the horizon, and the range lay empty in the gray pre-dawn light. Empty except for one man. Henry Patterson stood at the range master station, his lined face illuminated by the glow of his computer screen as he prepared the day's target rotations. 65 years old. 47 years of military service between active duty and civilian contractor work. The kind of man who had forgotten more about firearms than most operators would ever learn. He looked up as Elena approached, his eyes tracking from her face to the trident on her chest and back again. Something shifted in his expression. Not recognition exactly. Something deeper. Something that reached across decades. Commander Hartwell. His voice carried the gravel of too many years spent around gunfire without adequate hearing protection. Wasn't expecting anyone this early. Wanted to get some trigger time before the formal qualifications, Chief. Hope that's not a problem. Patterson studied her for a long moment. His eyes narrowed slightly, focusing on something Elena could not see. Hartwell, he repeated slowly. Any relation to Theodore Hartwell, OSS man back in the day? Elena felt a chill run down her spine. My grandfather. You knew him. Patterson's face cracked into something approaching a smile. Knew him, that man taught me to shoot at Camp Pendleton in 1968. I was 18 years old and convinced I knew everything about rifles. Your grandfather spent 3 days showing me exactly how wrong I was. He moved to the weapons locker, his movements betraying the stiffness of age but none of the hesitation. Theodore Hartwell could shoot the wings off a fly at 400 meters, patient as stone, never raised his voice, never lost his temper, just kept correcting, kept teaching until you either got it right or gave up entirely. Patterson pulled 3 weapons from the locker: M4A1, K416, M110 sniper rifle. He laid them on the counter with the reverence of a priest preparing sacraments. He talked about his son sometimes, Marcus. Said the boy had the same gift. Steady hands, steady nerves, steady everything. Patterson met Elena's eyes. Said Marcus would be the best of them all. Elena's hand moved briefly toward her chest, where her father's trident rested. He was, until he wasn't. Patterson nodded slowly. Heard about what happened. Training accident, they said. Faulty equipment. He paused. Lost a lot of good ones that way. Equipment fails. Men don't get to. He gestured toward the firing lanes. Your grandfather's student wants to shoot. I'm not going to say no. What are you running? Full qualification course. All 3 weapons. Patterson's eyebrows rose. Most officers qualified on their primary weapon and called it sufficient. Running the full battery suggested either insecurity that demanded constant validation or competence that required maintenance. Elena suspected Patterson was trying to determine which category she occupied. I'll set the lanes, he said finally. Standard engagement distances. Standard course is fine. I'm not here to impress anyone, Chief. Just want to make sure my skills are sharp before deployment. Patterson nodded and moved to prepare the range. Elena retrieved her M4A1 from the armory, the weapon she had carried through 3 combat tours and countless training exercises. The rifle had become an extension of her body at this point, its weight and balance as familiar as her own hands. She loaded magazines with methodical precision, 30 rounds per magazine checked twice for proper seating and spring tension. No room for malfunctions when lives depended on every trigger pull. The M4 qualification course ran through multiple engagement scenarios. Close quarters at 7 meters. Standard infantry ranges out to 300 meters. Rapid target acquisition drills. Shooting from cover. Shooting while moving. Elena settled into her firing stance. The rifle stock pressed tight against her shoulder, breathing slow and controlled. The first target appeared at 7 meters. She put 2 rounds center mass before most shooters would have acquired a proper sight picture. The morning passed in controlled bursts of noise and concentration. Each weapon received the same treatment. 40 rounds through the M4A1, perfect score. 50 rounds through the HK416, perfect score. The M110 sniper rifle required different techniques, different breathing patterns, but the results were identical. Every shot exactly where she intended it to go. Patterson watched from the tower, his expression unreadable. When Elena finished the final course and made her weapon safe, he called down to her. Commander Hartwell, that's 3 perfect scores in one morning. 40 out of 40 on everything. Elena looked up at him. Is that unusual? Patterson shook his head slowly. I've been running this range for 23 years. I've seen exactly 4 people shoot perfect scores on all 3 weapons in a single session. He paused. Your grandfather was one of them. Elena felt something warm spread through her chest. Recognition from someone who had actually known her grandfather meant more than 1,000 perfect scores. Thank you, Chief. That means a great deal. Just calling it like I see it, ma'am. Patterson made a notation on his clipboard. You've got his eye. You've got his patience. Theodore Hartwell would be proud of what you've become. The rest of Team 7 began arriving as the sun climbed higher. Operators filtering onto the range in 1s and 2s, preparing for their scheduled qualifications. Elena remained cleaning her weapons with careful attention while she observed her new command. Lieutenant Nolan Prescott shot first. His movements were efficient but slightly rushed. He scored in the high 30s out of 40 on his M4 course. Competent but not exceptional. Weston Kearney surprised her. The communications specialist from rural Wisconsin put 38 rounds exactly where they needed to be. His farm boy background translated into practical shooting skills that came from necessity rather than tactical training. Garrett Hensley moved like a man who had been shooting since childhood, which according to his personnel file was exactly the case. His grandfather had taught him at age 6, starting with a .22 rifle and working up to every weapon system the military offered. His score reflected that history, 40 out of 40, not a single miss. The Marines arrived as Team 7 finished. Callahan's Force Recon Unit moved with the aggressive confidence of men who believed themselves the apex predators of the military food chain. They shot well as Elena expected. Force Recon selection standards demanded it. Callahan himself took position 3 lanes down from where Elena stood. She watched him through her peripheral vision as he ran through his qualification course. His movements were precise, professional, the movements of a man who had been shooting in combat for nearly a decade. His score was 37 out of 40, excellent by any standard. Elena walked to the lane beside him without announcement. She retrieved her M4A1 from its rack, loaded a fresh magazine, assumed her firing stance, and waited for Patterson to call the course hot. Conversation stopped. Operators who had been packing gear or reviewing scores turned to watch. The targets appeared in rapid succession. Elena engaged each one with mechanical efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just smooth trigger pulls and the particular rhythm of controlled violence that separated professionals from amateurs. 40 rounds, 40 hits, center mass groupings tight enough that most of the holes overlapped. She cleared her weapon, made it safe, and stepped back from the line. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Callahan stared at his target, then at hers. His jaw worked like he wanted to say something, but could not quite form the words. His score had been excellent, but standing next to Elena's perfect performance, it looked insufficient. Patterson called down from the tower, his gravelly voice carrying across the range. "Commander Hartwell, that makes 4 perfect scores this morning. Your grandfather would be proud." Elena nodded acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked away without looking at Callahan. She did not need to look. She already knew what she would see in his eyes. Doubt? Confusion? The first cracks appearing in a worldview that had seemed unshakable just 24 hours ago. Good. Let him think about that during the long flight to Afghanistan. The helicopters lifted off from Naval Air Station North Island at 0400 exactly. 2 MH-60 Blackhawks carrying SEAL Team 7 and Marine Force Recon toward a refueling stop in Turkey, and then onward to the mountains of Afghanistan. Elena sat in the troop compartment of the lead aircraft, her back against the vibrating bulkhead, her eyes closed but her mind fully alert. Sleep was impossible on these flights. The noise, the vibration, the knowledge of what waited at the other end. But rest was still possible, the kind of conscious relaxation that operators learn to achieve anywhere, anytime. Weston Kearney sat across from her, 25 years old, with the eager expression of someone who still believed that training prepared you for everything combat could throw at you. He would learn differently soon enough. They all did. Hensley sat to Elena's left, his expression distant as he stared at nothing in particular. Memories moving behind his eyes, of another helicopter ride 34 years ago, of a young lieutenant with red hair and steady hands who had carried him to safety through a desert that wanted to bury them both. Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her chest, feeling the familiar weight beneath the fabric. "Soon, Dad," she whispered into the roar of the turbines. "Soon." Hensley heard anyway. His eyes shifted to her face, then to the spot where her hand rested over her heart. Understanding passed between them without words. He leaned closer, pitching his voice to carry over the helicopter noise. "Your father talked about you, you know. During that patrol in Kuwait, we had 12 hours between the IED and extraction. 12 hours sitting in a bombed-out building, waiting for helicopters that might never come." Elena looked at him. "What did he say?" "Said he had a daughter back home, 3 years old with red hair just like his. Said she was the bravest person he'd ever met." Hensley smiled slightly. "Said you'd fallen off your bicycle the week before he deployed. Skinned both knees so bad they bled through the bandages. You didn't cry. Not once. Just got back on the bicycle and tried again. Elena remembered that bicycle, pink with white streamers on the handlebars. She still had a faint scar on her left knee from that fall. He said that's when he knew you'd be okay. Whatever happened to him, wherever the Navy sent him, you'd be okay. Because you were a Hartwell, and Hartwells don't quit. Elena's throat tightened. He said that. Those exact words. Hensley's voice roughened. That kind of courage, it passes down through generations, Commander. I knew the moment you walked into that briefing room that Marcus Hartwell's daughter was going to be something special. You've got his bearing, his confidence, his way of making everyone around you believe that everything's going to be okay, even when the world's falling apart. He paused. He'd be proud of you, prouder than you can imagine. Elena nodded slowly, not trusting her voice. She turned to look out the helicopter's open door, watching the darkness blur past as they flew toward whatever waited in the Afghan mountains. 4 hours later, they landed in Turkey to refuel. The stop passed in a blur of organized chaos. Fuel trucks, security perimeters, intelligence updates that changed nothing substantial, but added minor details to their tactical picture. Elena used the 30 minutes to review satellite imagery one more time, looking for changes in the compound's defensive posture, looking for anything the initial assessment might have missed. Nothing obvious. The enemy either did not know they were coming or was confident enough in their defensive position to not bother with additional preparations. Elena hoped for the former. She planned for the latter. 6 hours after leaving Turkey, they crossed into Afghan airspace. The helicopters dropped to nap of the Earth altitude, following terrain contours to avoid radar detection. The flight became rougher, the aircraft banking and diving to maintain their low profile. Elena's stomach protested the aggressive maneuvering, but she forced it down through sheer will. Air sickness was for rookies. She was a SEAL commander bringing her people into harm's way. No room for weakness, real or perceived. The radio crackled. Valkyrie 6, this is Overwatch. Target area in sight. Initiating surveillance sweep. Elena keyed her handset. Copy Overwatch. Report target status. The ISR operator's response took 5 seconds. 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Valkyrie 6, be advised. We're getting strange readings from the target area. Thermal imaging shows the compound is cold. Say again, no heat signatures detected in primary structure. Elena's blood went cold. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice level, despite the alarm bells screaming in her head. Overwatch confirm. No heat signatures in primary target structure. Confirmed Valkyrie 6. Compound appears to be empty. No movement. No heat. No signs of occupation. Elena looked at Hensley. The old chief's face had gone hard. The expression of a man who had seen too many operations go wrong to be surprised by anything. Trap, he said quietly. They knew we were coming. Elena's mind raced through possibilities. The intelligence had been specific. 4 hostages, 72-hour execution timeline, confirmed by multiple sources. Either the intelligence was catastrophically wrong, or the enemy had moved the hostages, or this entire operation had been compromised from the beginning. None of those options were good. Overwatch, expand your search radius. Look for any heat signatures within 500 meters of primary target. Roger, Valkyrie 6. Expanding search. Stand by. Elena addressed her team through the internal communication system. All elements be advised. Target may be compromised. Maintain tactical posture, but prepare for possible abort. Callahan's voice came through from the second helicopter. Reaper 16 copies. What's our play? Commander. It was the first time he had asked her opinion on anything. The first time he had acknowledged her authority without the subtle resistance that had colored every previous interaction. Progress, perhaps, or just the reality of combat stripping away everything except what mattered. We hold at the insertion point until we have better intelligence. If the compound is empty, we need to know where the hostages actually are before we commit. Understood. The helicopters continued toward their landing zone, while Elena waited for Overwatch to complete their expanded search. Every second felt like an eternity, every possibility running through her head simultaneously. If the hostages were dead, she had failed. Failed her mission, failed her team, failed the woman her father had saved 34 years ago. If this was a trap, her people could be flying into an ambush that would kill them all. If the intelligence was simply wrong, they were wasting precious time while the real execution deadline ticked away. The radio crackled again. Valkyrie 6 Overwatch. We've completed the expanded sweep. Report. We have 4 heat signatures approximately 200 meters north of primary target. Secondary structure. Appears to be an older building, possibly Soviet-era construction based on the architectural profile. 3 signatures are mobile, 1 is stationary. Assess the stationary signature may be injured or restrained. Elena's heart lurched. 200 meters north, a secondary structure that intelligence had completely missed. 4 signatures matching the 4 hostages they were trying to rescue. She pulled up her mental map of the area, overlaying everything she knew about Soviet construction patterns from her grandfather's OSS documentation. If that secondary structure followed standard Soviet templates, it would have features the current intelligence assessment had never considered. Maintenance tunnels. The Soviets built redundancy into every permanent installation. Underground passages connecting to egress points outside the primary defensive perimeter. Overwatch, can you provide imagery of that secondary structure? Sending now Valkyrie 6. The tactical display in Elena's helmet lit up with satellite imagery. She studied the structure, comparing what she saw to patterns burned into her memory from years of studying her grandfather's archives. Soviet construction, 1980s field engineering, thick walls, minimal windows, defensive positions integrated into the architecture, and they're barely visible in the imagery, a ventilation shaft protruding from the ground 30 meters from the main structure. Exactly where maintenance tunnel access would be if Soviet engineers had followed their standard template. All elements change of plans. Elena's voice carried absolute authority. Primary target is compromised. Hostages have been moved to secondary structure 200 meters north. We're going in through the back door. Hensley leaned forward. Commander, you think there's a tunnel system? I know there is, Chief. Elena pointed to the ventilation shaft in the imagery. Soviet engineers used standardized designs across multiple theaters. They didn't change doctrine between Germany and Afghanistan. That shaft connects to a maintenance tunnel that runs directly under the target structure. Your grandfather's intel is 80 years old, and it's still accurate. The Soviets built these facilities to last. The tunnels exist. Hensley studied the imagery for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. If you're right, we can bypass their entire defensive perimeter. Come up through the floor before they know we're there. That's exactly what we're going to do. The helicopters touched down at the original landing zone 2 kilometers from the target. The moment the skids hit dirt, Elena was out the door, her team flowing behind her in practiced formation. The Afghan night was cold and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds. The mountains rose around them, ancient and indifferent to the small human drama playing out in their shadow. Elena took a knee, letting her night vision goggles paint the world in shades of green. Behind her, Hensley coordinated the teams while Callahan's Marines established a security perimeter. Valkyrie 6 to Reaper 16. Elena spoke quietly into her radio. We're moving to the secondary target. Your Marines hold the perimeter and maintain overwatch. If this goes loud, I need you ready to provide suppressive fire and extract us. Callahan's response was immediate. Roger, Valkyrie 6, we've got your back. Simple words, but Elena heard something different in his voice than she had heard in the mess hall. Something that sounded almost like trust beginning to form. She pushed the thought aside. They could sort out personal dynamics later. Right now, 4 lives depended on her making the right decisions. Assault element on me. We're taking the long way around. Elena led her reduced team northeast through a dried riverbed, using the terrain to mask their movement from any observers at the primary compound. Hensley followed close behind, then Prescott with his breach charges, then Kearney with the communications package. The riverbed twisted through broken terrain, sometimes offering perfect concealment, sometimes forcing them to low crawl across exposed sections. Elena's shoulders burned from the weight of her equipment. Her knees protested the rough stone, but she kept moving. Pain was temporary. Failure was permanent. After 18 minutes of movement that felt like hours, they reached the position Overwatch had identified. The secondary structure loomed against the stars, smaller than the main compound, partially collapsed on one side, seemingly abandoned. But thermal imaging did not lie. 4 heat signatures inside meant hostages or guards or both. Elena studied the building through her rifle scope. Soviet construction definitely. The characteristic brutalist design. Thick walls, minimal windows. But they're barely visible in the darkness, the ventilation shaft she had identified in the satellite imagery. Prescott, Kearney, you're with me. Chief, hold here with the security element. If we're not out in 15 minutes, assume compromise and extract. Hensley's jaw tightened. Commander, with respect, you shouldn't be leading the entry personally. If something goes wrong, I need to be there to fix it. Elena met his eyes. My grandfather documented these tunnel systems. My father would have known exactly how to navigate them. This is Hartwell territory, Chief. I have to see it through. Hensley held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. 15 minutes. Not a second more. Elena moved toward the ventilation shaft with Prescott and Kearney flanking her. The opening was small, barely wide enough for a person wearing full combat gear. But it was accessible. She pulled the grating aside, wincing at the slight screech of corroded metal. The shaft dropped 6 feet to a concrete floor below. Dark, silent, waiting. I go first, she whispered. Prescott, you follow with charges ready. Kearney maintained communications with Hensley and Overwatch. She lowered herself into the shaft, her rifle preceding her into darkness, that her weapon light turned into harsh shadows and uncertain angles. The tunnel stretched in both directions, maybe 4 feet high, 3 feet wide. Tight quarters for combat, but perfect for concealment. The air smelled of concrete dust and decades of neglect. Elena moved forward in a combat crouch, every sense heightened to maximum alertness. Behind her, Prescott and Kearney followed in single file. Their movement was surprisingly quiet despite the confined space and heavy equipment. The tunnel ran for 40 meters before terminating at a heavy steel door. Soviet-era construction, definitely. Mechanical lock rather than electronic. Simple but effective, and vulnerable to someone who understood the engineering principles behind it. Elena pulled out her multi-tool and went to work. The lock was corroded but functional. She worked each component methodically, feeling for the resistance points that would indicate proper alignment. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. 3 minutes later, the lock clicked open. Elena eased the door inward, revealing a dark room that smelled of concrete dust and human fear. Her weapon light swept the space, identifying threat angles and potential dangers. Empty. A storage room abandoned, except for rusted equipment and debris. But she could hear voices above her. Muffled conversation in Pashto. The words indistinct, but the tone clear. Guards. At least 2. Possibly more. And somewhere in this structure, 4 Americans waited for rescue or execution. Stairs at the far end, Elena whispered. Standard Soviet design. We clear this level, then move up. They swept through the storage level room by room, finding nothing but abandonment and decay. The stairs were where she expected them, a concrete spiral leading upward into darkness. Elena began climbing, each step measured and deliberate. The stairs were concrete, which meant noise discipline was critical. One careless footfall would alert the guards above and turn this rescue into a hostage execution. At the top of the stairs, another door. This one was not locked. Elena could hear voices clearly now, close enough to distinguish individual speakers. 2 men talking in low tones about American politics and why the prisoners were valuable for propaganda purposes. She held up a fist, halting the team, then pointed to Prescott and made a series of hand signals. Breach on my mark. Flashbang first. I take left. You take right. Prescott nodded and moved into position. Elena counted down from 3 on her fingers. 3, 2, 1. The door exploded inward. Prescott's flashbang detonated with a disorienting blast that turned the room into temporary chaos. Elena was through the door before the light had faded, her rifle up and tracking for targets. 2 guards, exactly as she had predicted, both temporarily blinded and disoriented by the flashbang, both reaching for weapons they would never get to raise. Elena's first shot took the left guard's center mass. Her second shot followed so quickly it sounded like one long pull. The guard dropped without firing a shot. Prescott's target fell half a second later. Similar placement, similar efficiency. The room cleared in under 3 seconds. Professional violence executed with the precision of years of training. And there in the corner of the room, 4 Americans huddled together. 3 were young, late 20s or early 30s. Aid workers who had believed they could make a difference in a world that did not want their help. They were dirty, malnourished, showing signs of rough treatment, but nothing immediately life-threatening. The 4th was older, gray hair, a face marked by years of hard service in difficult places, eyes that had witnessed too much suffering to ever be surprised by it again. She sat apart from the others, her left leg clearly injured and infected, based on the crude bandaging and fever flush across her face. Dr. Catherine Shaw, the woman Marcus Hartwell had saved 34 years ago. The woman who had written letters every year since his death. The woman who had spent 3 decades living the life Elena's father had given her. Recognition flashed in Shaw's eyes as Elena approached. Something about the face, the bearing, the way Elena moved. That face, Shaw whispered, her voice rough from dehydration and infection. That bearing. You move exactly like he did. Her voice cracked. You're Marcus Hartwell's daughter. I'd recognize that determination anywhere. Elena knelt beside her, emotions she could not afford threatening to overwhelm her. Yes, ma'am. I'm Commander Elena Hartwell, and I'm getting you out of here. All of you. Shaw's eyes filled with tears. He saved my life 34 years ago. I watched him disarm a bomb that would have killed us all, and then he died training my replacements. I've thought about him every day since. I know. Elena's voice roughened. I know everything. The letters you wrote, the lives you saved, the legacy you carried forward. She squeezed Shaw's hand. Now it's my turn. That's what Hartwells do. We bring people home. She turned to the younger hostages. They stared at her with the shell-shocked expressions of people who had given up hope and suddenly found it restored. Can you walk? They nodded. Good. Stay close and do exactly what I tell you. Elena keyed her radio. Hensley, we have the hostages. 4 souls, 1 injured. Preparing for extraction. Hensley's voice came back immediately. Copy, Commander. Extraction route is clear. We're ready to move. Elena was helping Shaw to her feet when the building shook. The explosion came from the east. A massive blast that collapsed the wall inward, debris and dust filling the air. Through the gap, Elena could see the pre-dawn sky and the flashes of ongoing combat. An RPG. Whether by accident or design, the result was undeniable. Their escape route through the tunnel was now blocked by tons of rubble. Prescott's voice cut through the chaos. Commander, tunnels collapsed. We can't get back the way we came. Elena's mind raced through options. The building was structurally compromised. Another hit could bring the entire thing down on top of them. They needed a new exit route immediately. And then she saw it. A ventilation shaft in the ceiling, partially exposed by the blast damage. Soviet engineers built redundancy into everything, including emergency escape routes. Prescott, that shaft in the ceiling. Does it look large enough for personnel? Prescott assessed quickly. Barely, ma'am. We'll have to go one at a time and the hostages will struggle. But it's possible. Then that's our exit. Get charges on that grating and blow it open. We're going up and out. She keyed her radio again. Hensley, our egress is compromised. We're going to emerge on the roof. I need immediate suppression of enemy positions and extraction at alternate LZ. Hensley's response was immediate. Copy, Commander. Moving to support. And then Callahan's voice cutting through from the perimeter position. Reaper 16 to Valkyrie 6. We see movement at the primary compound. Multiple hostiles heading your direction. You've got maybe 5 minutes before they reach your position. 5 minutes. 5 minutes to get 4 hostages through a ventilation shaft, across a damaged roof, and to an extraction point while enemy forces closed in from all directions. Elena steadied her breathing. Fear was natural. Fear was expected. What mattered was what you did with it. Impossible odds had never stopped a Hartwell before. They were not going to stop her now. Prescott's breach charge detonated with a sharp crack, blowing the ventilation grating clean off the ceiling. The shaft beyond looked barely wide enough for a person, let alone someone carrying combat equipment or nursing an infected leg wound. But barely wide enough was still wide enough. Hostages first, Elena ordered. Prescott, you boost them up. Kearney, you're receiving on the roof. Get them to cover as fast as possible. The young aid workers went first. fear overcoming hesitation as Prescott literally shoved them up into the shaft. They scrambled through with the desperate strength of people who knew death was the alternative to movement. Elena turned to Shaw. The older woman was pale sweat beading on her forehead from fever and pain. Her infected leg had swollen to nearly twice its normal size. Every step was agony written across her features. "Dr. Shaw, I need you to climb. Can you do that?" Shaw met Elena's eyes, the same eyes that had looked into Marcus Hartwell's face 34 years ago in a different desert under different circumstances. "I can do whatever it takes to get out of here." Her voice was rough but determined. "Your father didn't save my life so I could die in a hole in Afghanistan." Elena supported Shaw's weight while Prescott positioned himself beneath the shaft. Together, they lifted the older woman toward the opening. Shaw's injured leg scraped against the metal edge, and she bit back a scream that wanted to escape. But she kept climbing. Inch by agonizing inch, Catherine Shaw pulled herself through the shaft with arms that trembled from exhaustion and a will that refused to surrender. Elena watched from below her heart and her throat until Shaw's boots disappeared into the darkness above. "Prescott, you're next. I'll be right behind you." The lieutenant scrambled up into the shaft with practiced efficiency. Elena was reaching for the edge when gunfire erupted behind her. The door they had breached minutes earlier exploded inward as enemy fighters realized where the Americans had gone. Elena spun her rifle up and firing in one smooth motion. 3-round bursts, center mass. Professional violence that dropped 2 fighters before they could return fire effectively. But there were more behind them. So many more. She emptied her magazine, dropped it, slammed home a fresh one in a reload that took less than 2 seconds. Fired again, taking down another fighter who had tried to flank through the dust and debris. They kept coming, pouring through the doorway like water through a broken dam. "Commander, move!" Prescott's voice from above, urgent and commanding. Elena fired one last burst and dove for the shaft. Her hands found purchase on the metal edges, and she pulled herself up with desperate strength. Bullets sparked off the metal around her, one round grazing her thigh with white-hot pain that she forced herself to ignore. She climbed through darkness that seemed to last forever. Her shoulders scraped against metal. Her gear caught on every protrusion. Below her, the gunfire continued as enemy fighters flooded into the room she had just evacuated. Elena emerged onto the roof to find her team already moving toward the edge of the building. Prescott and Kearney were half carrying Shaw between them, her injured leg dragging uselessly. The young aid workers stumbled ahead, terror giving them speed they did not know they possessed. The pre-dawn sky was lightening to gray. They were losing the advantage of darkness with every passing second. "Move!" Elena urged, forcing her injured leg to keep pace. The wound was not serious. A graze that hurt like hell, but had not hit anything critical. She would survive if they could reach the extraction point before the enemy reorganized. The roof was damaged, unstable. Gaps yawned where the RPG blast had weakened the structure, threatening to drop anyone who stepped wrong into the rubble below. Elena navigated the obstacle course while simultaneously assessing their tactical situation. Enemy forces were converging from multiple directions. She could hear them shouting to each other in Pashto, coordinating their movements, preparing to cut off any escape route. And then she saw him, a sniper, positioned on higher ground 300 meters to the east. The pre-dawn light glinted off his scope as he tracked the movement on the roof, tracked the hostages. Elena watched in horrifying slow motion as the sniper settled his aim, saw exactly where his barrel was pointed, at Catherine Shaw, at the woman her father had saved, at the living embodiment of Marcus Hartwell's legacy. She did not think, did not calculate, did not weigh options or consider consequences. She simply moved. Elena sprinted across the damaged roof, putting herself between the sniper and the hostages, making herself the more visible target, the more attractive option for a marksman looking to take down Americans. The sniper took the bait. His first shot cracked past Elena's head close enough that she felt the sonic pressure against her cheek. She dove behind a concrete barrier that had once been part of the roof's defensive architecture, her shoulders screaming protest as she hit the ground. "Hensley!" She keyed her radio, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "Sniper position 300 meters east, elevated ground. He's got the hostages pinned down." "Copy, Commander. Working on it." Elena risked a glance over the barrier. The sniper was adjusting his position, trying to get an angle on the hostages, who had taken cover behind an air conditioning unit. If he moved another 10 meters to his left, he would have a clear line of fire. She could not let that happen. Elena broke from cover, sprinting laterally across the roof while firing toward the sniper position. Not aiming for kills, aiming for suppression, making him keep his head down, making him focus on her instead of the people she was trying to protect. Bullets chased her across the roof. Concrete chips exploded around her feet. One round punched through her plate carrier on the left side, the ceramic absorbing most of the energy, but the impact spinning her sideways. She went down hard, rolled, came up behind another piece of debris with her rifle still in her hands. Blood ran down her side where the bullet had penetrated the edge of her armor. Not deep, not fatal, but painful enough that every breath felt like fire. "Commander," Prescott's voice strained with urgency. "We've reached the roof edge. Hostages are ready to descend, but that sniper has us pinned." Elena checked her ammunition. 2 magazines remaining, maybe 60 rounds against a trained marksman with the high ground and all the time in the world. The math did not work, but math had never stopped a Hartwell before. She keyed her radio to the team frequency. "All elements, listen carefully. I'm going to draw the sniper's fire. When he's focused on me, you get those hostages off this roof and to the extraction point. Do not stop. Do not look back. Do not wait for me." Hensley's voice came back immediately. "Negative, Commander. We're not leaving you behind." "That's an order, Chief. The mission is the hostages. Everything else is secondary." "Commander, Chief Hensley," Elena's voice hardened. "My father gave his life so Catherine Shaw could keep living, so she could save thousands of other lives with the skills he taught her. I will not let that sacrifice be for nothing. Get her out. Get all of them out. That's what matters." Silence on the radio. Then Hensley's voice rough with emotion. "Understood, Commander. Godspeed." Elena took a deep breath. Then she broke from cover and ran directly toward the sniper position. Not away, not laterally, directly toward. It was the last thing any trained marksman would expect. Targets ran away from danger. They sought cover. They did not charge straight into the teeth of enemy fire. The sniper hesitated. Just for a moment. Just long enough. Elena covered 20 meters before he recovered and began firing. Rounds snapped past her, each one closer than the last. She felt one tug at her sleeve, another graze her ear. Blood ran down the side of her face, hot and wet. She dove behind a low wall 30 meters from the sniper's position, close enough to see the shape of his body through her scope. Close enough that missing became much harder for both of them, and close enough that he could not possibly engage the hostages without turning his back on her. "Reaper 16, this is Valkyrie 6. Elena's breath came in ragged gasps. "I've got the sniper fixed. You have maybe 2 minutes before his friends arrive. Get those hostages moving, now." Callahan's response was immediate. "Commander, my Marines can provide covering fire. We can suppress that position and get you out." "Negative. Your primary mission is the hostages. Execute." "Ma'am, execute, Sergeant. That's a direct order." Elena heard movement behind her. The enemy reinforcements were coming. She could hold this position for another minute, maybe 2. Long enough for the hostages to reach the extraction point. Long enough for Catherine Shaw to escape. Long enough for her father's legacy to survive. She raised her rifle and fired toward the sniper position. Controlled bursts that kept him focused on her rather than the people escaping behind her. He returned fire and a round punched through the wall inches from her head. "Come on," she whispered. "Keep looking at me. Keep shooting at me. Just a little longer." And then impossibly she heard footsteps behind her. Not enemy footsteps. American footsteps. Moving toward her position rather than away. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Derek Callahan was sprinting across the roof toward her. Full combat gear. Rifle in hand. Running directly into the kill zone she had created. "What the hell are you doing?" Elena shouted. Callahan dove behind the wall beside her, breathing hard but grinning like a maniac. "With all due respect, ma'am," he said, "fuck your direct order. I don't leave commanders behind." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. The exact same words he had spoken in the mess hall. The same dismissive phrase he had used to tell her to leave the operators section. But now in this context, they meant something completely different. Sergeant, I gave you a direct order to protect the hostages, and my Marines are doing exactly that. Callahan checked his rifle. They don't need me to babysit them, but you need someone to watch your six while you play hero. This isn't playing hero. This is tactical necessity. Bullshit. Callahan met her eyes. This is you trying to die for your father's legacy, and I'm not going to let that happen. Before Elena could respond, Callahan popped up from behind the wall and laid down a devastating barrage of fire toward the sniper position. The marksman ducked his attention, split between two threats, now instead of one. Reaper 16 to Overwatch. Callahan keyed his radio while continuing to fire. We need fire support on that sniper position, now. And then another voice cut through the chaos. Young, female, absolutely calm. Reaper 16, this is Viper 3. I have the shot. Sloan Mercer, 24 years old, Marine sniper, one of perhaps a dozen women to earn that designation in the entire Corps. Elena had noticed her during the briefing, had recognized the particular stillness that came from knowing your weapon was the difference between successful Overwatch and dead teammates. She had not expected to owe her life to that stillness. Mercer's M110 spoke once, a single shot from 800 meters away. The enemy sniper pitched backward and moved no more. Silence fell over the rooftop, the kind of silence that followed sudden violence. Elena slumped against the wall, her body finally registering the full extent of her injuries, blood loss making her movement sluggish, pain from half a dozen wounds demanding attention she could not afford to give. Outstanding shot, Corporal. Her voice came out rough. Outstanding shot. Mercer's response was matter-of-fact. Just doing my job, Commander. Hensley's voice came through the radio warm with something that sounded like pride. Skill like that isn't taught, Commander. It's earned. Callahan was already on his feet, pulling Elena up beside him. We need to move. Their reinforcements are 30 seconds out. They moved across the roof, Callahan supporting Elena's weight while she provided what covering fire she could manage with one functioning arm. Behind them, enemy fighters began pouring onto the rooftop. Bullets cracked past their heads. At the roof's edge, a rope dangled toward the ground below. Hensley waited at the bottom, his expression tight with worry. Hostages are clear, he shouted up. Helicopters inbound. 2 minutes. Elena looked at Callahan. You first, I'll cover. Like hell. Callahan grabbed the rope with one hand and wrapped his other arm around Elena's waist. We go together or not at all. There was no time to argue. Elena gripped the rope with her functioning hand, and together they descended in a controlled fall that was more falling than controlled. They hit the ground hard and pain exploded through Elena's injured leg. Callahan pulled her up immediately. Move! Now! They ran, limped, staggered toward the extraction point where two Blackhawks were already flaring for landing. The rotor wash hit them like a hurricane, and Elena had never felt anything so beautiful. Hensley met them halfway. He grabbed Elena's other arm, and between him and Callahan, they carried her the final distance to the helicopter. Hands reached out from the aircraft, Kearney and Prescott pulling them aboard. The moment they cleared the skids, the pilot lifted off, not waiting for anything approaching normal departure procedure. Just up and away, trading altitude for distance from the enemy below. Elena collapsed onto the floor of the helicopter, her body finally surrendering to the accumulated trauma. A medic was already working on her, cutting away gear to access the wounds. Across from her, the hostages sat in stunned silence. The young aid workers stared at nothing, their minds still processing the violence they had witnessed. But Catherine Shaw was moving. Despite her own injuries, despite the fever and the pain, and the 3 weeks of captivity, she crawled across the helicopter floor toward Elena. Let me see those wounds. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 34 years saving lives in the worst places on Earth. The medic looked uncertain. Ma'am, you're injured yourself. You should... I've been treating patients with worse injuries in worse conditions for longer than you've been alive, son. Shaw's eyes never left Elena's face. Now let me work. The medic stepped back. Shaw's hands were steady as they assessed Elena's wounds. Professional, competent, the hands of a healer who had learned her craft in the crucible of combat. Pressure on that shoulder wound, she instructed the medic. She's losing blood faster than I'd like. Start an IV wide open and check for additional injuries. Her eyes met Elena's. Your father taught me to do this. Her voice cracked. 34 years ago, in sand just like we left behind. We had 12 hours waiting for extraction, and he spent every minute teaching me things that weren't in any manual. Emergency procedures, field surgery, how to keep people alive when everything was trying to kill them. Tears streamed down Shaw's face, cutting tracks through the dirt and blood. He saved my life that day. Then he died training the next generation. Every life I've saved since then, every person I've helped, that was Marcus Hartwell's legacy living through me. Elena felt her own eyes burning. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving exhaustion and emotion in its wake. "I know," she whispered. "Your letters. My mother saved every one. I read them all before I deployed." Shaw's hands stilled on Elena's wounds. You knew who I was before you came for us. I knew exactly who you were. I knew exactly why this mission mattered." Elena's hand moved weakly toward her pocket. "I've carried his trident since the day I earned my own. It's been with me through 3 combat tours, through every firefight, through every moment I wondered if I was worthy of his memory." Shaw helped her pull out the tarnished metal and placed it in Elena's trembling hands. "He saved you so you could save thousands of others. And now I've saved you so you can keep going. That's what Hartwells do. We preserve legacies. We make sure that sacrifices mean something." Shaw looked down at the trident, the metal that had touched Marcus Hartwell's chest 3 decades ago, the metal that had become Elena's most precious possession. "3 generations," Shaw whispered. "Your grandfather mapped the tunnels that got us out. I read about it in the intelligence brief. OSS documentation from World War II. 80 years old, and it saved our lives." Elena nodded. "He spent years documenting Soviet construction patterns. The intelligence community forgot about it, but I didn't. Your father taught me the skills to keep these hostages alive for 3 weeks. Emergency medicine, psychological support, how to maintain hope when hope seems impossible." Shaw's voice strengthened. "And you brought us all home. You put yourself between a sniper and his targets. You were willing to die so we could live." She pressed the trident back into Elena's hand and closed her fingers around it. "The Hartwell legacy isn't just service, Elena. It isn't just sacrifice. It's salvation. 3 generations of your family have been saving lives in ways most people can't even imagine. And now that legacy continues through you." Shaw gripped Elena's hand tightly. "The people I help from this day forward, that's your legacy now. Your father's sacrifice passed through me and passed through you. 3 generations of Hartwells, all dedicated to bringing people home alive." Elena felt something shift in her chest, something that had been wound tight for 34 years, finally beginning to loosen. "We made it," she said quietly. "All of us." Shaw smiled through her tears. "Your father would be proud. So proud." The helicopter flew east through the dawn. Afghanistan's mountains receded behind them, harsh and beautiful and indifferent to the human drama that had played out in their shadow. Elena let herself drift toward unconsciousness, trusting that her team would get her home, that Shaw would keep her alive, that somehow, despite everything, this impossible mission had ended with the only outcome that mattered. Everyone survived. Everyone would see home again. 3 days later, Elena entered the Coronado mess hall on unsteady legs. Her arm was in a regulation sling. Her shoulder wound had required surgery to remove bone fragments and repair damaged tissue. Her leg still ached with every step, and the doctors had warned her that full recovery would take months. But she was alive, and she was walking, and that was more than enough. The mess hall went silent when she entered. Not the hostile silence of her first day. Something completely different. Something that felt like acknowledgement. And then as she watched, every SEAL and Marine in the room stood. Not at attention, not formally, just rising from their seats in a gesture of respect that needed no words. Elena felt her throat tighten. She nodded once, acknowledging the gesture, then moved to collect her food. The conversations resumed, but at a lower volume. People watched her move through the room, but not with skepticism, with the kind of attention that came from having witnessed courage under fire. She found an empty table and was about to sit when Derek Callahan approached. He moved with careful precision around his bandaged arm. The wound he had received while helping her escape the rooftop, the price he had paid for disobeying her direct order. "Commander Hartwell, permission to join you, ma'am." Elena gestured to the seat across from her. Granted, Sergeant. Callahan sat. His usual confidence was tempered by something that looked like humility. He arranged his food carefully before speaking. Ma'am, I owe you an apology, not just for pulling your hair in this mess hall 4 days ago, for every assumption I made before I knew who you were, before I saw what you could do. Elena waited. My father taught me a lot of things right about being a Marine, but he taught me some things wrong about women in combat roles, about female leadership, about whether someone like you belonged in command. Callahan reached into his pocket and pulled out $500 bills. He placed them on the table between them. This was my bet against you lasting through the first firefight. I was so convinced I was right that I put real money on it. Elena looked at the money, then at Callahan. I want to donate this to a Women Veterans Scholarship Fund, he continued. If you'll help me do that, if you'll let me try to fix some of the damage men like me have done. Elena studied him for a long moment. The gunnery sergeant who had dismissed her so casually 4 days ago was gone. In his place was someone who had seen the truth and was trying to become better because of it. I'll match it, she said finally. 500 from me, 500 from you. $1,000 toward helping the next generation of female operators get the training and opportunities they deserve. Callahan's relief was visible. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you for not leaving me behind when I came back for you. When I disobeyed your direct order and put myself in the kill zone. You didn't leave me behind either, Sergeant, when you had every right to. When I'd earned being left behind through 3 days of treating you like the enemy. You were never the enemy, Commander. Callahan's voice was quiet, sincere. I was just too stupid to see it. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes. The tension that had defined their relationship from the first moment in this mess hall had transformed into something else. Not friendship exactly, but perhaps the beginning of mutual respect. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Always, Sergeant. Callahan set down his fork. I called my father, after we got back, told him about the mission, about what you did, about how wrong I'd been. What did he say? Callahan's jaw tightened. He said I was letting a pretty face cloud my judgment. Said you probably got lucky. Said women don't belong in combat leadership no matter what they accomplish. Elena waited. I told him he was wrong. Callahan met her eyes. First time in my life I've ever said those words to him. Told him I watched you take a bullet meant for hostages. Watched you hold a position alone against a sniper while the rest of us escaped. Watched you lead with more courage and competence than any commander I've ever served under. He paused. He hung up on me. We haven't spoken since. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Understanding. The cost of changing beliefs that had been instilled since childhood. I'm sorry, Sergeant. That couldn't have been easy. No, ma'am, it wasn't. Callahan's voice roughened. But some things are more important than easy. Some things are more important than keeping peace with people who are wrong. He straightened in his seat. I requested a transfer. Want to serve under your permanent command if SEAL Team 7 will have a Marine attachment. Figure I've got a lot to learn about real leadership. And you're the best teacher I'm likely to find. Elena studied him, seeing the sincerity behind the request. The man who had pulled her hair and told her to fuck off was genuinely asking to serve under her command. To learn from someone he had dismissed as incompetent based on nothing but gender. I'll consider it, Sergeant, pending review of your conduct during the mission and completion of your medical recovery. Understood, ma'am. And Sergeant, if you're serious about this, you need to understand something. Serving under my command means accepting that competence has no gender, that the best operator wins regardless of what's between their legs. Callahan nodded slowly. I understand, ma'am, and I accept those terms completely. Elena extended her hand. Callahan shook it. His grip was firm but careful of her injuries. As he returned to his table, Elena noticed Sloan Mercer watching from across the room. The young Marine sniper who had taken out the enemy marksman with a single shot from 800 meters. The woman who had saved Elena's life with skill and precision that most operators could only dream of. Mercer gave Elena a subtle nod, a gesture of solidarity from one female warrior to another. Elena returned the nod, understanding what it meant. They were still rare, still fighting for every ounce of respect in a world that wanted them to fail. But they were winning, one mission at a time, one converted skeptic at a time, One perfect shot that proved capability trumped prejudice. That evening, Elena sat alone in her office. Her phone rang. Commander Hartwell. Elena. Catherine Shaw's voice stronger now after 3 days of proper medical treatment. They're letting me make calls from the hospital. I wanted to thank you again. Properly this time, without blood loss and adrenaline clouding everything. How are you feeling, doctor? Better. The antibiotics are working. The infection is responding to treatment. Shaw paused. They tell me I'll be stateside in another week for continued recovery. Back to work within a month if I don't push too hard. Back to work. There are always more people who need help, Elena. More lives to save. More of your father's legacy to carry forward. Shaw's voice softened. That's what I wanted to tell you. What I needed you to understand. Elena waited. After your father saved my life in Kuwait, after he died training my replacements, I made a promise. Every life I saved, every person I helped over the next 34 years, that would be his legacy. That his sacrifice wouldn't be for nothing. Shaw's voice caught slightly. I kept that promise. Thousands of people alive today because of the skills your father helped me learn. Thousands of families still whole because Marcus Hartwell took the time to teach a young medic how to keep people alive in impossible situations. I know, Elena said quietly. Your letters told that story. Every year for 34 years. But now you've saved my life. Saved all of us. Which means the legacy continues. Shaw's voice strengthened. The people I help from this day forward, that's your legacy now, Elena. Your father's sacrifice passed through me, and now passes through you. 3 generations of Hartwells all dedicated to bringing people home alive. Elena felt tears threatening, but forced them back. That's the job, ma'am. That's what we do. It's more than a job, Elena. It's a calling, and you answered it the same way your father did, with competence and courage and a willingness to sacrifice yourself for others. Shaw paused. The trident you wear, you've earned it in ways most operators never will. Remember that when the doubters come, because they'll keep coming, but you've proven yourself beyond any question, beyond anything they can ever say to diminish what you've accomplished. After the call ended, Elena sat alone in her office, her father's trident warm in her hand. 3 photographs now hung on the wall. William Hartwell in his World War II uniform. Marcus Hartwell in Kuwait. SEAL Team 7 after the extraction. 3 generations, 3 wars, 1 unbroken line of service. She placed her father's trident beside her own on the desk. Tarnished metal and bright metal side by side. Past meeting present. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new doubters, new missions where she would have to prove herself again. But tonight she allowed herself this moment, this certainty. Everyone came home, Dad, she whispered. That's all that ever mattered. The lamplight caught both tridents, making them gleam like promises kept. Outside the Pacific stretched toward the horizon, and within these walls, within the hearts of those who had witnessed what she could do, something permanent had been forged. Respect earned. Legacy continued. Mission complete. The end.